welcome to the program. This very special edition of the Brian J. Matos podcast is going to be focused on the workers of the world, the workers of our country here in the United States, the workers of all countries and all cultures all over the world. So we're going to have a little bit of a shorter program this week, and thank you all, by the way, for bearing with me. I know I sound a little stuffy. I am a little stuffy, but pushing through to get this episode out ahead of our Labor Day holiday in the United States, though I know Labor Days are celebrated in different parts of the world on different dates, different times of the year, but I thought since we have a big audience stateside, it was going to be a good time to post this episode, and I think it'll be one that's hopefully one that you listen to whether you're hearing it in its original form, Labor Day of 2023, or whether you hear it in Labor Days of the future or any other time of the year. Hopefully what we talk about today will be just as relevant and just as salient because workers are valuable to us every day of the year, and the incredible work that so many do and so many thankless jobs that go unseen and unappreciated are worthy of our attention at all times. So thank you for bearing with me with my stuffy nose and my little bit of a hoarse voice today. But I thought it was important to have this episode, which I promised at the end of last week's program. And before we get into it, I want to make sure that we preview what's coming up on future episodes of the program. So we've got David Allison coming up next week, on our next episode at least. And David Allison has written a book called The Death of Demographics, Value Graphic Marketing for a Values-Driven World. We previewed this on the program recently. This is what I'm really looking forward to. We're going to get this interview posted on our next episode. And the main thesis of this particular book and this particular interview topic is different ways to think about our markets, right? We've spent several episodes on this show talking about demographics, which are very quantitative metrics of age and gender and ethnic background and religious affiliation and other data points, including your health status. And many data scientists and analysts in the marketing and business community have used these to target us with everything from advertisements to political messages to just trying to figure out who we are and what we think about. But David's argument in this book is really that's not good enough. That is too superficial, and you start putting people into buckets that don't make sense. Not every 80-year-old thinks the same. Not every 20-year-old thinks the same. Maturity levels are different. Gender does not give you a clear idea of what somebody's values necessarily are, nor do where they grew up or what their religious background is or what their politics are. And the same thing with trying to figure out what someone's values are in buying a product is not necessarily the same as their values in who they vote for or who their values or what their values look like for what neighborhood they choose or what school they pick. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I don't want to spoil it. I just want to get you as excited as I am for that episode, and that's going to be coming up next week. We've got some other great guests coming up, but what I want to focus on for the balance of this program is the labor movement. And I don't want to focus just on the organized labor movement. I want to make a distinction between those two things. Organized labor can speak for itself. The very nature of organized labor and labor unions around the world is that they are representatives of large groups of workers in very important professions, from teachers to nurses to law enforcement to janitorial services and every sort of working class job in between. And they have strong voices, not as strong as they used to be perhaps, but still they have strong voices, they have strong representation, they pay their dues into those unions, they negotiate big contracts. And at least here in the U.S., we've been hearing a lot more about the labor movement because those unions have had an increasingly important role to play in negotiating new workplace safety requirements, negotiating new contracts, negotiating new pay and benefits. Certainly, teachers' unions became a very prominent part of the global conversation on reopening after COVID and some of those shutdowns and lockdowns. And I know people have different views on that, but nonetheless, the labor movement played an incredibly important role in big cities in particular across the U.S. And I also think it's important to call out that we've heard about labor unions much more in the recent past because of a labor shortage. We just don't have as many workers in much of the world, much of the Western world at least, as what we have had in the past. There's just not as many people doing the blue collar jobs, not as many parents raising their kids to take on the family business, which was often very labor intensive and labor oriented. And so the focus on this community of workers has grown, and their power and their leverage has grown significantly. And so everything from, a scare in the U.S. earlier this year that the freight workers of America would potentially go on strike, or the dock workers of America, or the UPS drivers and pilots and packers, all of which would have ground our economy to a halt given how much we depend on these groups. So I wanted to take a few moments as we approach Labor Day 2023 in the United States, and wherever you are in the world and whenever you celebrate your Labor Day, I wanted to take a moment on this program where we talk about the big trends and the big topics over a long period of time to first of all acknowledge all of those hard workers throughout the world who put in so much time to such labor-intensive jobs, manual labor jobs, that are so critical to our society. And we found out how critical they were during the COVID-19 lockdowns, didn't we? We found out how important essential workers really were. And we found out which jobs were essential. And they weren't the ones that pay the most. In fact, many of them were the ones that don't pay that much at all. And yet, when we were missing those functions, or we thought we might be missing those functions, we quickly realized that compensation is not necessarily a proxy for value. It may be a proxy for skill. It may be a proxy for how many people are capable of doing a job and how specialized that may be, but it certainly is not representative of true value that somebody brings to the society that they're participating in. Whether it was grocery store workers, people who keep the power lines up, people who work in janitorial services, people who work in garbage collection, recycling collection, anybody in the medical profession, but particularly those who are working to serve the food in the hospitals, and those techs who are doing all of the what we would consider to be routine but so essential work to keep patients safe, to keep them bathed, to keep them healthy, to keep their rooms clean. All of the people in law enforcement and in fire suppression or fire departments, and all of the people who work in schools in every capacity, people who couldn't work from home because their jobs are too important for them not to physically be where they are. Even people in the tech sector, those who work on servers, for example. You need to keep the internet running, you need to keep your company's computers running, and that usually requires somebody to be in person where those servers are. I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the unseen workers in our society, whether it's those who are working in the fields to pick all of the crops that make up the food that all of us eat to keep our society sustained, those who drive all of the trucks, the long hauls across the country, around the world, those who are delivering food in the middle of the night, and those who are delivering supplies at 4 a.m., the people who deliver the mail, for goodness sake, everybody out there who has a job that you need to show up in person for, no matter what you get paid, it's important that you know that I and my audience and all of us who recognize the value that you bring, that we appreciate everything you do. But the main thing I wanted to get across in this particular episode as a call to not just my listeners, but to anybody who is interested in the formation of society and how we support each other and how we help each other and the role that we all play in building our countries and building our civilizations. There used to be an unwritten but universally understood principle, which is that compensation in and of itself is not a representation of gratitude for the essential work of a society, that we as a community show our gratitude in how we elevate certain people and certain professions, irregardless of what their actual salary and benefit structure looks like. And that's not to say that anybody anywhere should ever accept less than what they deserve. Whoever you are, whatever you do, you should always go out and find the place that will appreciate you the most. And if that means paying you the best or giving you the best benefit package or working for a place that negotiates that, all the power to you. But we know, for example, that there will be certain inevitable truths, that the people who work in the business community managing large companies will almost always get paid more than a 15-year veteran of a local police department that may get paid pretty well by general standards, but isn't necessarily going to be able to generate $20 million over the course of their career, the way that some business executive or some entrepreneur was able to by starting their own business and pursuing a different path. It's not that we inherently value one more than the other. It's that we understand that the economy values one more than the other. But that's an economic calculation. We have to have a societal calculation. We have to value people within our society in terms that are not dollars and cents. And that's where the general value of respect comes into play. That's where the currency of acknowledgement comes into play. There's a reason why we go out of our way, and we teach our kids to go out of their way to say thank you to the server at a restaurant or a barista at a coffee shop or somebody who's cleaning the floors in these places, because we know that they're not necessarily getting acknowledged in their paycheck for the value that they bring. And so we acknowledge them in other ways. We give them gratitude and thanks and praise. And ideally, we can show them how much they mean to us in a currency that may not be able to pay the mortgage, but a currency that pays your mental state, a currency that pays your emotional state, your spiritual state, to be respected. That's something I do believe has been lost in much of the Western society over the last 30 or 40 years. One of the currencies we always understood was the currency of respect. That even if you're not the highest paid, that doesn't mean that we're not, as a society, simply going to treat you on a pedestal against other professions because we know the work you do is essential, is life-saving or life-sustaining, is essential to the sustaining of our entire society, and it is the foundation upon which everything else that we do can be built. We can't pursue great scientific endeavors if we can't eat. We can't pursue great business endeavors if we're constantly worried about where we're going to live and if our air conditioning is going to work in the south or our heat is going to work in the north. These are all the foundational things of food and housing and basic health services. And if we have those needs taken care of, now we can operate at a higher level. Now we can focus on and we can think about the more complex problems that allow people to go off and become business leaders and entrepreneurs and, Wall Street tycoons. When all those other needs are met, now we're able to take other people who have important skills that may lead them to have more income in their life. But all of that is only possible if we take care of the basics and the foundations of our society. But underpinning that foundation has always been the principle that we know we're never going to be able to pay every essential worker what we'd like to pay them, because then it would become too expensive for the entirety of society to function. If every single person who worked in the HVAC industry was a multimillionaire, nobody would be able to afford to own a home or build an apartment, unfortunately, right? But the good news is that an HVAC professional isn't asking to be paid $10 million a year. They're asking to be paid fairly, to be able to live a good and healthy life with reasonable benefits, and they just ask to be treated with respect because they are up in your attic in Texas when it's 105 degrees or 120 degrees and they're sweating themselves off, but they're working hard to make sure that you're comfortable in your home so that you can go off and do the other things that you need to do for your family. And it's that general respect that we have for those workers that keeps them going. It's that little extra piece of currency that makes that long day in that Texas attic worth it. Or for the person who has to work on Christmas Eve when the power lines go down and they have to be away from their family to go and restore power for other families, but they do it because they take pride in their work. Or the truck drivers who are taking days and days and days away from their families, long hauling on dangerous roads at times through dangerous weather conditions, but they know that that load needs to get somewhere because whoever's receiving that package has an essential job to do with it to move it along for somebody else in our society. I think that we have lost some of that basic respect that manual labor necessarily needs to come with. The people who take care of agricultural work, whether it's in the fields of a farm or whether it's just on the golf course or taking care of your own front lawn, those people have very important jobs, but just because they're not the highest paid or the highest skilled doesn't mean they deserve any less praise or respect. And I say this simply because on this show even, we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs, with business leaders and owners, and that is the magic of so much of the Western world and much of the rest of the world in modern economic times is that an individual with a wonderful idea that can help so many others, but they have to navigate the business world. They have to navigate raising money and hiring employees and managing that business and making sure they balance their debts and making sure that they can go public in the right way and building their business so they can help ever more people. This has been praised, and it should be praised, and it's essential. It's what makes certain countries and certain societies more profitable and more prosperous than others. We do not in any way, shape, or form want to diminish that, but it's not a zero-sum game. We shouldn't elevate that skill at the expense of the everyday worker that makes all of that entrepreneurial endeavor possible. Because as we all found out when the world was disrupted, if the people who work on the docks get sick and they can't unload those ships, no matter how good your business is, if you can't get your supplies from the working class people who bring them to your warehouses, your business can't function. Your restaurant can't function. Your pop-up shop can't function. Your house can't function. You can't buy a car, or not the one you want. You can't fix your house. You can't build a house if all of those essential jobs go unfilled or go undone. So this is not a message of class warfare, of let's praise labor at the expense of business, or let's praise the worker at the expense of the entrepreneur. To the contrary, the entrepreneur has enjoyed a long and fruitful period in the sun throughout the world in the modern economic era, and we want them to continue to pursue that greatness. But unfortunately, somehow we came to the idea that entrepreneurs are better than workers, inherently better than workers. Business owners are somehow inherently more valuable to a society because they often earn more money. And I'm simply here today to challenge that assumption. I don't believe that most people think that that's true, but I do believe that a lot of folks in positions of authority and power believe it, and unfortunately, and most importantly, those who are in those executive leadership positions in government, in business, even in the other areas of the private sector, too many of them have come to believe it too. Too many of them have come to drink their own Kool-Aid. I'm very mindful that the listeners of my program are generally a higher educated community who are in leadership positions in companies and businesses around the world. So knowing that I have this microphone and this audience, and knowing that you're interested in many of the topics we bring up on this show, I felt it was important that I address that community specifically. We are thrilled to have leaders like yourselves who are leading businesses, governments, and who are leading the country in a difficult period of transition as our demographics do start working against us, for example, as bigger and bigger problems require more creative solutions. But don't forget your workers. And I'm not saying you got to pay them at 65 times the rate of, inflation. I'm not saying that you have to, wipe out all of your profits to pay your worker every last penny. I'm simply saying it's not just about money. It's about respect. It's about meeting your workers in the middle. It's about knowing that your company can only be as successful as those who are willing to sacrifice as much as you are to make it a success. It's about making sure that those workers have their basic needs taken care of and that their families are looked after. And the biggest shame that I see over the last 50 or 60 years, but specifically in the U.S., this may not be as true everywhere in the world, is that in the past, business leaders and business owners took enormous pride in how workers grew up within their families. They took tremendous pride in seeing a young entrepreneurial, but somebody who wasn't willing to or able to take the risks of an entrepreneur. But they had that mindset, and they would come in as an apprentice in a company. And oftentimes this would be in an automotive shop or a manufacturing shop, but it could also be in your sort of everyday fields, like an HVAC worker, like an electrician, like a plumber, like a carpenter, like a window installer, for goodness sake. And they would come in as an apprentice, and they would learn, and they would grow, and they would grow up. And they would grow up with the company, and they would grow up with mentors and guides and people who would show them the ropes of the industry, and they'd become masters at what they do, whatever that skill is. And the leaders of these businesses, many of which were family-owned, took great pride in the family that they were building within their company. Now, that didn't mean that there weren't tough choices. That didn't mean that there weren't days that they had to, unfortunately, let some people go. And sometimes their business struggled, and they had to make those tough choices. We get that, we understand that, but they were tough choices. That's the point. That letting somebody go was like letting go of a member of their family. That it came as a last resort, not a first resort. And that they understood that the entire success of their company was based on the success of the people who worked there. That the nature of a company is that it is the combination of all the people who contribute to it and who serve the customers of it that make it what it is, that allow it to be profitable. And to this day, the best businesses are still the ones who don't just hire the best people, but they train them to be better than when they found them. And they take care of them as best that they can, as long as those workers are willing to pull their weight. So for all of those leaders and business owners out there, as we approach this Labor Day, I simply ask you to think less one-dimensional. Workers aren't just griping about their compensation, although in a rising interest rate environment, that is ever more important so that they don't fall behind. And they're not always just talking about workplace safety rules or some of the basic issues around their job, safety issues oftentimes. It's just general respect. That's it. It's just general respect. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. And for those who work their butts off, they just want to be acknowledged. That doesn't cost the bottom line of a company anything. It only costs a little bit of time, valuable time, and I assure you the productivity will be so much higher from workers who feel more appreciated. But as I wrap up this segment, I do have to make a comment to the youngest generation, who also are listeners of this program, who are not yet in their business growth phase. You, the young workers of America, have to get out of your mind the idea that the only path to success and the only path to respect is a path that takes you to an executive C-suite somewhere of a large white-collar company. There are more paths to success than that. There are literally hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized but very successful and very profitable local businesses whose owners are nearing retirement. And they need the young people of America to step up and train to be ready to take these places over, lest they be absorbed by some large conglomerate that will take over that business and simply consolidate its customers and lay off all of its employees, which has become an increasing path to success for larger businesses to simply absorb their smaller and oftentimes better run competition. It is important that people understand that the path to success can be diverse, can be winding, and absolutely can be blue collar. And I know there's a lot of great programs out there and podcasts out there that talk about this, but not enough is talked about in avenues and hallways like ours, like this program, where we do spend a lot of time talking about the big think and the academic world and some of those complex topics that tend to be the realm of scientists and academics. I think it's very, very important for young people to understand that if your passion is working with your hands, this country needs you. The world needs you. And if you love to work with your hands and you happen to have some managerial skill and ability, there's a lot of great companies out there that need you to start training now to take them over in a few years. And you can have a wonderful life, solid income, and tremendous respect within our society. But also to the young people of the world and the young people of America, don't lose sight of the respect that we're expecting you to show of those who work hard every day, who show up, who put on uniforms, who go out into hot fields or hot houses for that matter, who do the jobs that other people don't want to do. Too often, young people glorify only certain professions in the tech sector or the Wall Street sector or the elite innovation sector. Well, we don't want to diminish those, but it's important that we find ways to glorify and, again, to respect those professions that don't necessarily get into our mainstream public consciousness, but for whom society simply cannot function without them. And my last message here for everybody is blue collar or white collar, working class or not, whether you consider yourself part of labor, organized or otherwise, or you consider yourself part of management, whoever you are, understand we need everybody. Everybody is valued, and there is more than one way to measure value. And to all of those managers out there who don't like what they do, but they do it because of their compensation, there may be a point in which you've made enough, and your real calling may be with your hands. It may be with real labor where you can create real things and leave them behind as a legacy for the world. We need you too. And your calling may not ultimately be the path that your parents put you on or that you started years ago. It's never too late to make a change. It's never too late to contribute to your country and your society in a different way. So as I wrap this podcast, I suppose I want to end with a thank you to all of the workers, to all of the blue-collar workers, everybody who's an essential worker who has to show up to their job and who loves to do so, who works in the manufacturing field or the agricultural field, in the healthcare field, in the education field, in law enforcement and public safety, in every single job that requires you to show up and show out every day and apply your skills as a master over time. And to all those who are teaching the next generation of workers, first and foremost, we respect you, we see you, we're cheering for you, we're rooting for you, and we do hold you in a high and special place in our society. I hope this particular Labor Day 2023, you're able to take a day and a weekend to relax because you've earned it and you enjoy it. But if you happen to be working this weekend, or if you happen to have a schedule that requires you to be working through this particular weekend, I hope you're able to take a little bit of time away to focus on your family, to focus on yourself, to focus on your health, because Lord knows we need you. And as the country continues to grow and our needs only become more diverse, we're going to need ever more workers, and we need you to be in the best possible shape, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to contribute to this wonderful and growing society. Thank you for all that you do to teach our kids, to clean our streets, to keep them safe, and to make life comfortable for all of us, those in labor and those outside. And for everybody who takes care of our seniors as well, some of the hardest and most thankless and least paid work in the country, and yet arguably the most important because you're looking after the wisdom of the nation and of the world. We thank you. And on behalf of myself, my producer, everybody who works on my program, and everybody hopefully in my larger community, we thank you all, and we wish you a very happy and restful Labor Day. If you want to hear more programs like this and my views on a whole variety of topics, you can visit my website. It's brianjmatos.com. If you have any reactions to what you've heard today or in any previous episodes, you can send me an email, info@brianjmatos.com. You can find me on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. I'm at Brian J. Matos there. I have a Facebook fan page, Brian J. Matos. You can search for that or just look up my personal Facebook page, brian.matos. I'm also available on Instagram, Brian J. Matos, and clips of my programs are available on YouTube. You can search Brian J. Matos Podcast or simply find me at Brian J. Matos Podcast. Again, next week we will have, or the next episode, we will have David Allison on the program to talk about value graphics and the death of demographics. It should be a fascinating discussion. And we've got another set of great guests coming up in the weeks and months to come. We'll be debuting episodes throughout the month of September and October before we take a little break for the holidays at the end of 2023. And then, of course, we'll be back in 2024 post-holidays with a whole new set of shows and episodes, which effectively will be season 2 of our podcast series. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you'll visit the website. I hope I can hear from many of you. And I look forward to having more discussions with fascinating guests as we continue our journey of discovery and curiosity. And so I invite you all and encourage you all to stay curious.